But when High Chancellor Vextar announced the result, that the exploration vessel Indomitable drifted at the edge of known space, her hull dark against the star field. She was small as starships went, barely 200 meters long, built for speed and stealth rather than combat. Her crew of 4 represented humanity's best hope for preventing galactic war. Commander Wu Jin Park stood on the bridge, watching the sensor displays with calm attention. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, the Void Devourers waited. Intelligence reports suggested they were massing for another push into inhabited space, preparing to consume more worlds and grow stronger from each victory. Contact on long-range sensors, reported Lieutenant Yuri Kim from the tactical station. She was young, barely 25, but her analytical mind had earned her a place on the most important mission in human history. Multiple large signatures, distance approximately 50,000 kilometers and closing. How many? Wu Jin asked, difficult to determine. They seemed to absorb sensor energy rather than reflecting it. I'm reading anywhere from 12 to 50 vessels, all significantly larger than anything in our databases. Engineer Jae Sung. Oh looked up from his console, where streams of data flowed across multiple screens. Power signatures are unlike anything we've seen before. They're not using fusion, antimatter, or any conventional energy source. The reading suggests they might be drawing power directly from the fabric of space itself. At the communications station, psychologist Yoonji Lim monitored every frequency, listening for any signal that might indicate intelligence beyond mere destructive capability. Her specialty was xenopsychology, understanding how alien minds worked. She had studied every known species in preparation for this moment. No conventional communications detected, she reported, but there are patterns in their energy emissions that might be attempts at contact.
The signals are too complex to be random. Commander Wu Jin nodded.
This was the moment that would determine whether the human approach would succeed or fail catastrophically. Every other species that had encountered the Void Devourers had done so in the context of battle. The humans were about to try something unprecedented. Open all communication channels, he ordered. Broadcast on every frequency we have. Yoonji's hands moved over her controls, and suddenly the Indomitable was transmitting on thousands of different wavelengths simultaneously. Radio waves, quantum signals, gravitational pulses, even modulated light beams. Every possible method of communication humanity had ever discovered. The message they sent was simple, translated into mathematical concepts that any intelligent species should be able to understand. It wasn't a challenge or a demand for surrender. It wasn't a threat or an attempt at intimidation. It was an invitation. We are humans of the Terran Federation, the message began. We come not to fight or to flee, but to understand. We wish to communicate. For long minutes, nothing happened. The dark shapes continued approaching, their forms barely visible against the starfield. They seemed to absorb light itself, making them appear as moving holes in space. Then Yuri's instruments detected something unprecedented. Commander, they're slowing down. The lead vessels have stopped their advance. Jae Sung looked up from his engineering station in amazement. Their power signatures are changing. The energy patterns are becoming more stable, less chaotic. It's almost as if they're thinking. Incoming transmission, Yoonji announced, her voice tight with excitement and fear. It's not on any conventional frequency, but there's definitely intelligence behind it. The patterns are too complex and organized to be natural phenomena. The signal that filled the Indomitable's speakers was unlike anything humans had ever heard. It wasn't sound in any traditional sense, but somehow their minds interpreted it as communication. The message seemed to bypass their ears entirely and speak directly to their consciousness. Strange, small creatures, the voice seemed to say, though the words weren't words and the voice wasn't a voice. You do not flee. You do not attack. What are you? Commander Wu Jin felt his heart racing, but his training kept his voice steady. We are explorers, seekers of knowledge. We wish to understand who you are and what you need. Another long pause. When the response came, it carried overtones of confusion and something that might have been curiosity. Need. It's hunger we consume. It is what we are. What we have always been. Yoonji leaned forward at her station, her psychological training focusing on every nuance of the communication. There's pain in that signal, she whispered to Wu Jin. Not physical pain, but something deeper. Loss, maybe. Or loneliness. The psychologist took over the communication, her voice gentle and non-threatening. How long have you been hungry? How long have you been alone? The silence that followed lasted so long that Yuri began to wonder if they had lost contact. When the Void Devourers finally responded, their message carried such weight of sorrow that it seemed to press against the crew's minds like a physical force. Always, since the ending, since the last light failed and the cold came, we are the survivors of nothing, consuming everything to feel something other than emptiness. Jae-sung had been running continuous scans of the alien vessels throughout the exchange. Now he looked up with a mixture of wonder and horror on his face. Commander, I'm reading massive internal spaces in their ships. Not for crew or cargo. They appear to be storage areas filled with compressed matter. They're carrying the remnants of entire civilizations. Not to destroy, Yoonji said, understanding dawning in her voice. To preserve. They're refugees. She opened the channel again. The civilizations you've consumed, are they gone forever? Gone. No, sleeping, waiting. We carry them with us because we cannot bear to leave them behind. But they fade, grow silent, become less real with each passing cycle. Soon they will be truly gone, and we will be alone again. The truth hit the human crew like a physical blow. The Void Devourers weren't conquerors or destroyers in the traditional sense. They were survivors from some cosmic catastrophe, desperately trying to save the remnants of their own dead universe by preserving anything they encountered in the new one. What happened to your home? Commander Woo Jin asked gently. The response came as a flood of images and sensations rather than words. The crew of the Indomitable suddenly found themselves experiencing memories that weren't their own. Visions of a universe where entropy had won, where stars grew cold, and matter itself began to decay. They saw the last desperate exodus of beings trying to escape to somewhere anywhere that still had warmth and life and hope. The cold came too soon, the Devourers explained. The laws of physics changed. Energy could no longer flow. Entropy could no longer be reversed. Our universe was dying before its time. We fled through gaps in space itself, carrying what little we could save. Yuri wiped tears from her eyes, not realizing she was crying. But why do you attack instead of asking for help? Every species we encountered attacked us first. They saw us and felt fear. They fired weapons and demanded surrender. We learned that this universe speaks only in violence, so we learned to speak its language. Engineer Jae-sung had been working frantically at his console throughout the conversation. Now he looked up with excitement brightening his features. Commander, I think I understand their technology. They're not destroying civilizations, they're converting matter into a compressed, preserved state. It's like suspended animation, but for entire cultures. Could it be reversed? Yoonji asked. Theoretically, yes. The process appears to be designed for preservation, not destruction. With the right knowledge and equipment, we might be able to restore what they've taken. The implications were staggering. Every world the Void Devourers had consumed might still exist in some form, waiting to be awakened. The billions of beings thought dead might simply be sleeping. But before anyone could fully process this revelation, alarms began sounding throughout the Indomitable. Yuri's tactical displays lit up with new contacts, dozens of them approaching fast from the direction of inhabited space. It's the Alliance fleet, she reported grimly. War Chief Brutus is leading them. They're coming in attack formation. Through the communication link, the humans could sense the Void Devourer's reaction. Confusion turned to familiar fear, then hardened into resigned acceptance. The brief moment of peaceful contact was about to end the same way every other encounter had ended. They come to fight us, the Devourers said, their mental voice growing cold and distant, as all others have done. We will defend ourselves, as we always have. Commander Woo Jin watched the approaching fleet on his displays. Hundreds of ships representing dozens of species, all converging on this position with weapons armed and shields raised. In minutes they would open fire, and the galaxy's last hope for peace would die in the crossfire. Not if we can help it, he said quietly. He turned to his crew, these 3 other humans who had volunteered to risk everything on the chance that understanding might be more powerful than warfare. Jae-sung, can you interface with the Devourer technology? Create some kind of communication link between their ships and the Alliance fleet? Maybe. It would be dangerous, and I'm not sure what the effects might be. Yuri, can you position us between the 2 fleets? That would put us directly in the line of fire from both sides. Yoonji, can you maintain the Royal Assembly had never seen such chaos. Delegates from hundreds of species shouted over each other. their voices creating a storm of anger and fear that echoed through the crystal halls of Nexus Prime. War Chief Brutus of the Vorthak was on his feet, bone spear raised high, while General Krax of the Thraxians paced back and forth like a caged predator. Even the normally peaceful Etherians pulsed with agitated light. At the center of it all, Queen Regent Sujin Park sat calmly in her simple chair, waiting for the storm to pass. She had expected this reaction. Throughout galactic history, no crisis had ever been solved by anything other than overwhelming force or strategic retreat. The idea of trying something completely new was foreign to species whose cultures had remained unchanged for millions of years. "This is not strategy," War Chief Brutus roared, his voice carrying over the chaos. "This is madness dressed up as diplomacy. You ask us to send lambs to wolves and call it wisdom." High Priestess Zelana of the Mystic Orders raised her glowing staff, and her ancient voice cut through the noise like a blade. "The Vorthak speaks truth. My people have existed for 12 million years. In all that time, we have never encountered a threat that could be reasoned with once it began consuming worlds." General Krax slammed his 4 fists on his desk, making the entire section shake. The humans grew powerful through trickery and deception. Now they would have us abandon every proven military doctrine for the fantasy that monsters can be negotiated with. Ambassador Hyunwoo rose slowly from his seat. Unlike the aliens around him, he showed no anger, no frustration, no fear. His calm presence seemed to create a pocket of quiet in the midst of the storm. "Honored delegates," he said, his voice somehow reaching every corner of the Great Hall despite its gentle tone. "I understand your concerns. What we propose goes against everything your species have learned about survival." He paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. "But consider this. Everything your species have learned has failed against the Void Devourers. Perhaps it's time to try something your species have never learned." The hall fell into an uneasy quiet. High Chancellor Vextar took advantage of the moment to call for formal responses from each delegation. One by one, the species leaders stood to voice their positions. The Bruthan clans demanded an immediate military buildup. "Give us 100,000 ships," their representative growled, "and we will hunt these devourers to the end of space itself." The crystalline Etherians proposed evacuation to parallel dimensions. "Better to preserve what we can than lose everything to foolish pride." Their spokesperson chimed in harmonics of living light. The insectoid Zephyrians buzzed their suggestion for building impregnable fortress worlds. "Let them come to us. We will make their victories so costly that they abandon their advance." Each proposal followed patterns older than recorded history. Fight with bigger armies, hide in safer places, build stronger walls. The same solutions their ancestors had used against every threat they had ever faced. When it came time for the human delegation to speak, Queen Regent Sujin stood with quiet dignity. She was small compared to most beings in the hall, unremarkable by the standards of warrior races. Yet when she began to speak, every eye focused on her. 50 years ago, many of you sat in similar seats when the Caraxian Empire invaded human space. Your military experts predicted we would fall within days. Your intelligence services calculated that our small fleet could not possibly resist their overwhelming force. She gestured to Ambassador Hyunwoo, who activated a holographic display showing the old star charts from that conflict. You were right. By the standards of traditional warfare, we could not match their firepower, their numbers, or their technology. So we chose not to fight by traditional standards. The display changed, showing the famous Battle of Crimson Nebula where Captain So Young-han had turned an entire enemy fleet against itself through electronic warfare and psychological manipulation. We won that war not because we were stronger, but because we were different. We adapted to circumstances instead of forcing circumstances to adapt to us. Commander Wu Jin stepped forward, joining his mother at the center of attention. Despite his youth, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had faced death and chosen to laugh at it. The Void Devourers have learned to counter every military response, because every species responds the same way, he said. They expect attack, so they prepare defenses. They expect retreat, so they pursue. They expect fear, so they use terror as a weapon. He looked directly at War Chief Brutus. What they don't expect is curiosity, the massive Vorthak warrior snorted in derision. Curiosity does not stop plasma cannons or shield-piercing torpedoes. Neither do bigger plasma cannons or better torpedoes, apparently, Wu Jin replied mildly. The Zerion Defense Force had both, and they lasted less than an hour. Dr. Minseo Yu joined the human group at the center of the hall. Her scientific training showed in every gesture as she began explaining her analysis. Based on debris analysis from 17 different battles, we've identified a consistent pattern in devourer behavior. They adapt their tactics during combat, but they always adapt in the same direction, toward more efficient destruction. They've never had to develop responses to nonviolent contact. She activated her own display, showing complex mathematical models of devourer learning patterns. Think of them as an incredibly advanced weapons system. They can counter any attack, overcome any defense, defeat any strategy that involves violence. But what happens when you try to interact with a weapon system as if it were something else entirely? High Priestess Solana's staff pulsed with skeptical light. You make many assumptions about beings that have shown no signs of intelligence beyond destruction. Do we? Ambassador Hyunwoo asked. They learn, which requires intelligence. They adapt, which requires analysis. They choose targets, which requires decision-making. We've simply never given them reason to demonstrate any intelligence that doesn't involve efficient killing. Chancellor Dong-hyuk Lee had been silent throughout the debate, but now he stepped forward. His old soldier's eyes held the weight of too many wars. I fought in the Pacification War, he said simply. I was there when General Taemin faced 7 Caraxian champions. Do you know what made him different from their greatest warriors? The hall waited for his answer. He was the only one in that arena who wasn't trying to kill his opponents. While they focused on destruction, he focused on understanding. He won because he saw solutions they couldn't imagine. Dong-hyuk looked around at the assembled delegates. Every species in this hall has had the same conversation about the Void Devourers. Build bigger fleets, find better weapons, create stronger defenses. You're all trying to win a war. What if there doesn't need to be a war at all? The suggestion sparked another round of angry responses. Species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves united in their rejection of human naivety. But beneath the noise, a few voices began to express different thoughts. Commander Vexnin of the Orbital States, a race known for their cautious pragmatism, raised a tentative question. What exactly would this contact mission involve? Wu Jin had clearly been planning for this question. 1 ship, small crew, minimal defensive capability. We approach the edge of Devourer territory and broadcast on all frequencies. Not a challenge or a demand, but an invitation. An invitation to what? General Krax demanded. To talk, Queen Regent Sujin said simply. To share information. To discover what they want, what they fear, what they hope for. To treat them like intelligent beings instead of natural disasters. The debate that followed was unlike anything in the Assembly's history. For the first time, delegates found themselves arguing not about how to fight an enemy, but about whether the enemy needed to be fought at all. War Chief Brutus led the opposition with typical directness. This is weakness disguised as wisdom. The strong survive by destroying threats, not by trying to befriend them. But other voices began to join the human position. Commander Vexnin pointed out that traditional approaches had failed completely. High Minister Tralvin of the Merchant Guilds noted that peaceful contact would be far less expensive than military buildup. Even some military leaders began to express grudging interest in trying something completely unprecedented. The turning point came when Dr. Minseo presented her final piece of analysis. Her holographic display showed a projection of continued devourer advancement at their current rate of learning and adaptation. If they continue to grow stronger at this pace, she said quietly, our combined fleets will be unable to stop them within 6 months. Our fortress worlds will fall within a year. In 18 months, they will have consumed enough technology and knowledge to threaten the galactic core itself. The hall fell completely silent as delegates absorbed the implications. The mathematics were clear and terrifying. Traditional resistance would only delay the inevitable while making the devourers stronger. However, Dr. Minseo continued, this projection assumes continued military contact. If we could establish communication, if we could understand their goals and motivations, we might find solutions that don't involve feeding them more combat experience. The final vote was closer than anyone had expected. Many species abstained rather than choosing sides. Dr. Min Seo-yu stood before the Great Assembly, her hands shaking slightly as she prepared to deliver news that would terrify the galaxy's most powerful beings. Behind her, a massive holographic display showed the edge of known space, where stars had begun to disappear. Honored delegates, she began, her voice steady despite her fear. What we face is unlike anything in recorded history. The Void Devourers are not simply destroyers. They are learners. The Thraxian General Krax leaned forward in his seat, his four eyes focusing intently on the human scientist. Explain what you mean by learners, small one. Minseo touched a control on her device and the holographic display changed. It now showed a timeline of the Devourers' attacks, stretching back 6 months. Each world they had consumed was marked with different colored symbols. When they first appeared, the Devourers attacked the mining world of Kepler-7. The defenders used standard orbital cannons and energy shields. The battle lasted 3 days before the planet fell. She paused, letting her words sink in. 2 weeks later, they attacked the fortress world of Titan's Gate. The defenders used the same weapons and tactics. The battle lasted 6 hours. A murmur of unease rippled through the assembly hall. The crystalline Etherians pulsed with worried light, while the Vorthak warriors growled deep in their throats. The pattern continues, Minseo said, changing the display again. Each attack becomes faster, more efficient. The Devourers study how we fight, then adapt their methods to counter our defenses. By the time they reached the Zephyrian colony worlds last month, they were defeating military forces in minutes, not days. Commander Woojin Park entered the hall through a side door, still wearing his military uniform from the front lines. He was young for a commander, only 28 years old, but his eyes held the weight of too many battles. As the son of Queen Regent Su-jin, he could have stayed safe on Earth. Instead, he had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. The situation is worse than Dr. Yu described, he announced, drawing every eye in the hall. I've just returned from the Xerion system. We arrived 6 hours after the Devourers finished their attack. He walked to the central platform, his boots echoing in the sudden silence. Xerion had the most advanced defenses in the galaxy. Quantum barriers, reality-shifting weapons, even temporal mines that could trap enemies in time loops. None of it mattered. Commander Woojin activated his own display, showing recordings from the battle. The images were terrible to watch. Massive dark shapes moved through space, seeming to absorb light itself. Where they passed, ships simply vanished. The Xerion Defense Force tried every tactic in our databases. Energy weapons, kinetic bombardment, even experimental gravity weapons. The Devourers absorbed it all. More than that, they learned from it. By the end of the battle, they were using our own weapon designs against us. War Chief Brutus of the Vorthak stood up, his bone spear clutching in his massive hands. Then we use weapons they haven't seen before. New tactics, different approaches. With respect, War Chief, Woojin replied. That's exactly what every species has tried. The result is always the same. The Devourers adapt faster than we can innovate. High Priestess Zelana of the Mystic Orders raised her staff, its crystal head glowing with inner light. Her species was ancient, with knowledge stretching back millions of years. Perhaps we should consider retreat. My people know of dimensions beyond this one. We could evacuate to parallel realities until the threat passes. And leave them to grow stronger? Ambassador Hyunwoo spoke for the first time since the session began. Dr. Yu's research suggests they don't just learn combat techniques. They absorb knowledge, technology, even culture from the species they consume. Every world they take makes them more dangerous. The hall erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages, each species proposing their own solution. The Bruthan clans wanted to unite all the warrior races for one massive assault. The Etherians insisted on immediate evacuation. The insectoid Zephyrians buzzed angrily about building impenetrable fortresses. Through it all, the human delegation sat quietly, watching and listening. Chancellor Dong-hyuk Lee had seen this before. During his long military career, he had watched many different species react to crisis. They all followed the same patterns, falling back on instincts millions of years old. Fear made them predictable. The Devourers count on this, he said quietly to Queen Regent Su-jin. Every species responds to threat the same way their ancestors did. Fight, flee, or hide. It makes them easy to understand, easy to counter. Su-jin nodded. But humans are different. Humans don't have millions of years of evolutionary programming telling us how to react. Dong-hyuk agreed. We adapt to each new situation. It's why we're the only ones allowed in here without weapons. The other species follow their nature. We choose ours. High Chancellor Vextar called for order, his golden voice cutting through the chaos. Gradually, the shouting died down and delegates returned to their seats. The ancient being looked tired, older than his 1,000 years. We have heard many proposals, he announced. All have merit, but none address the central problem. How do we fight an enemy that learns from every battle? The hall fell silent. It was Queen Regent Su Jin who finally spoke. We don't fight them, she said simply. The reaction was immediate and explosive. War Chief Brutus roared his outrage. General Krax declared humans cowards. Even the peaceful Etherians pulsed with shocked light. The idea of not fighting went against everything these species believed. Hear me out, Su Jin continued, her voice somehow carrying over the noise. Every contact with the Devourers has been military. Every species has met them with weapons and warfare. They've learned to expect this response. Ambassador Hyunwoo stood up beside her. What if we did something they've never encountered before? What if, instead of fighting or fleeing, we tried to communicate? The suggestion was met with stunned silence. In the entire history of galactic civilization, no one had ever tried to talk to the Void Devourers. The concept was so alien that most species couldn't even process it. It's madness, General Krax finally said. These creatures have destroyed 47 worlds. They've killed billions of beings. You want to have a conversation with them? I want to understand them, Hyunwoo replied. Every species in this hall has reasons for what they do. The Thraxians fight for honor. The Vorthak hunt for survival. The Etherians seek knowledge. What if the Devourers have reasons too? Dr. Mincio stepped forward again, her scientific mind racing. It would be incredibly dangerous. We know almost nothing about their psychology or communication methods. Any ship that got close enough to attempt contact would be at extreme risk. Commander Wu Jin looked at his mother, then at the assembled delegates. I volunteer. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Every eye in the hall turned to the young human officer. He stood straight and calm, showing no fear despite volunteering for what most considered certain death. One ship, he continued, a small crew. We approach them not as enemies or prey, but as something completely new. If we succeed, we might find a solution that saves the galaxy. If we fail, he shrugged, we'll fail doing something no one has tried before. War Chief Brutus slammed his spear against the floor. This is not strategy. This is suicide with extra steps. Maybe, Queen Regent Su Jin admitted, but fighting hasn't worked. Hiding hasn't worked. Running hasn't worked. Perhaps it's time to try something that has never been attempted in galactic history. She looked around the Great Hall, meeting the eyes of delegates from hundreds of worlds. 50 years ago, this assembly created a special rule for humans. We were forbidden from carrying weapons because we had proven that we fight differently than everyone else. Today I'm asking you to trust that difference again. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves arguing on the same side. Warriors who had never agreed on anything suddenly stood united against the human proposal. But in the end, fear won out over pride. The galaxy was running out of options, and the Void Devourers were growing stronger every day. The vote was close, but it passed. Commander Wu Jin would take a single ship into the darkness at the edge of space. He would attempt the impossible. First contact with an enemy that had never shown mercy, never demonstrated intelligence beyond destruction, never given any sign that communication was possible. As the session ended and delegates began filing out of the Great Hall, Ambassador Hyunwoo approached the young commander. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. Wu Jin smiled. No, but that's never stopped humans before. 50 years ago, the galaxy was a different place. Earth was just another small world on the edge of known space. Most aliens had never heard of humans, and those who had considered them weak and unimportant. The Caraxian Empire ruled over 300 systems with an iron fist, and they were always looking for more territory to claim. Admiral Ji-Ho Choi stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Ship Determination, watching enemy vessels appear on his screens. The Caraxian invasion fleet was massive, over 1,000 warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. The alien ships were dark and angular, covered in weapon ports that glowed with deadly energy. Sir, they're demanding our surrender, reported Lieutenant Commander So Young-han from the communications station. She was young, barely 30, with the quick eyes of someone who had grown up among the stars. They say if we give up now, they'll only enslave half our population. Ji-Ho almost smiled. The Caraxians thought they were being generous. They had no idea what they were about to face. Open a channel to all ships, he ordered. This is Admiral Choi to the fleet. Remember, we're not here to beat them at their own game. We're here to play a game they've never seen before. The human fleet was tiny compared to the enemy force. 37 ships, none of them particularly impressive. The largest was barely a quarter the size of a Caraxian dreadnought. But Admiral Jiho had spent his entire career studying alien warfare, and he knew something important about every species in the galaxy. They all fought the same way their ancestors had fought. The Caraxians attacked in perfect formation, just like they had for 1,000 years. Their ships moved in straight lines, firing their massive guns at maximum range. It was an effective strategy that had conquered dozens of worlds. Against humans, it was useless. All ships, execute pattern Chaos 7, Jiho commanded. The human vessels scattered in every direction. Some flew straight up, others dove down. Several spun in tight circles. To the Caraxians, it looked like panic. Their commanders laughed and ordered their gunners to pick off the fleeing ships one by one. But the humans weren't fleeing. They were setting up. Captain So Young Han commanded the fastest ship in the fleet, a light cruiser called Swift Justice. While the enemy focused on the larger vessels, she slipped behind their formation. Her ship was too small to carry the heavy weapons needed to fight a dreadnought, but it didn't need to. Target their communication arrays, she ordered her weapons officer. Not to destroy, just to disrupt. The Swift Justice fired tiny missiles that exploded in bursts of electromagnetic energy. They didn't damage the Caraxian ships, but they did something more useful. They cut the enemy fleet's ability to talk to each other. Suddenly, the perfect Caraxian formation started to break apart. Ship captains couldn't receive orders from their commanders. When they tried to maintain their attack pattern without guidance, they began bumping into each other. Admiral Jiho watched the confusion spread through the enemy ranks. Now we move to Phase 2. All ships implement Operation Mirror. This was the part that would become legend. Instead of attacking the Caraxian fleet, the humans began copying their movements. When an enemy ship turned left, a human vessel would turn left. When the aliens fired their weapons, the humans would fire in the same direction. The Caraxians were completely baffled. Their enemies were acting like some kind of strange echo. Worse, because their communications were disrupted. Different parts of their fleet started thinking that other parts were the enemy in disguise. Within an hour, the mighty Caraxian armada was firing on itself. The battle should have ended there, but the Caraxian Empire was proud and stubborn. They sent reinforcements, an even larger fleet commanded by War Marshal Thekvar, one of their greatest military leaders. War Marshal Thekvar was confident he could succeed where others had failed. He knew about the communication disruption and the mirror tactics. His ships were prepared for human trickery. He wasn't prepared for what Captain So Young Han did next. Instead of engaging his fleet in battle, she flew directly toward his flagship. Her single small cruiser approached the massive dreadnought that carried 3,000 warriors. The Caraxians watched in amazement as the tiny human ship sent a message. War Marshal Thekvar, this is Captain So Young Han of Earth. I challenge your entire fleet to single combat. The alien commander couldn't believe what he was hearing. One small ship against his entire armada? It was either madness or stupidity. He decided to oblige the foolish human. All ships target the human vessel. Destroy it quickly so we can move on to the real war. Every gun in the Caraxian fleet turned toward the Swift Justice. Thousands of energy weapons charged up, ready to reduce the human ship to atoms. War Marshal Thekvar gave the order to fire. Nothing happened. The gunners pressed their controls, but the weapons wouldn't respond. Confused voices filled the communication channels. Engineering reports came in from across the fleet. Every single weapon system had mysteriously failed at the same moment. Captain So Young had spent the previous week sending small maintenance drones toward the enemy ships. The drones were disguised as space debris, too tiny and slow to seem threatening. The Caraxians had ignored them completely. Each drone carried a computer virus designed specifically for Caraxian weapon systems. While the aliens focused on the human fleet's obvious tactics, So Young had quietly infected every ship in their armada. With their weapons disabled, the proud Caraxian fleet was helpless. But the war still wasn't over. War Marshal Thekvar was a warrior of the old school. When technology failed, he fell back on honor and tradition. He sent a message to the human fleet challenging their best fighter to single combat. According to Caraxian law, if the human champion lost, Earth would surrender. If the alien champion lost, the war would end. The humans accepted. General Taemin Jang was chosen as Earth's representative. He was not a large man by human standards, and compared to the massive Caraxian warriors, he looked like a child. The combat was to be held on a neutral station, with representatives from both sides watching. The Caraxian champion was Bloodclaw Nexthar, undefeated in over 200 duels. He stood 3 meters tall with forearms and natural armor that could stop laser blasts. His weapons were legendary, energy claws that could cut through starship hulls. General Taman entered the combat arena wearing simple clothes and carrying nothing at all. The fight lasted exactly 17 seconds. Bloodclaw Nexthar charged forward with a roar that shook the station walls. His energy claws sparked with deadly power as he swung them toward the small human. Any normal being would have been cut in half, but General Taman wasn't there anymore. He had rolled under the alien's attack and was now behind him. Before Bloodclaw could turn around, the human's hands found a nerve cluster at the base of the warrior's skull. The mighty champion collapsed like a falling tree. War Marshal Thekvar demanded another fight, then another. Each time a different Caraxian warrior faced General Taman. Each time the human won without using a single weapon. He defeated 7 champions in less than 10 minutes. The war was over. The peace treaty that followed changed galactic law forever. The Caraxian Empire agreed to release all their conquered worlds and pay reparations to their victims. More importantly, a new rule was added to the Royal Assembly's charter. Humans would be the only species allowed to attend without weapons, not because they were peaceful, because they had proven that they themselves were weapons. Back in the present, Queen Regent Sujin finished telling this story to the assembled delegates. The Great Hall was completely silent. Even the most warlike species listened with respect to the tale of human victory. That was 50 years ago, she said simply. We've learned new tricks since then. The Great Hall of Nexus Prime stretched beyond what most eyes could see. Crystal walls rose high into the darkness above, glowing with soft blue light. Thousands of seats filled the massive space, arranged in perfect circles around a central platform. This was the Royal Assembly, where the galaxy's most powerful species gathered to decide the fate of countless worlds. Ambassador Hyunwoo Kim walked slowly through the main entrance. His simple gray robes moved quietly as he stepped onto the polished floor. Around him, hundreds of alien beings filled the hall with strange sounds and colors. But something made Hyunwoo different from all the others. He carried no weapons. The Vorthak delegation towered above most other species. Their thick, scaly skin was dark green, and bone spears longer than a human hung from their backs. War Chief Brutus growled as Hyunwoo passed, showing teeth like broken glass. The human didn't even look up. Near the eastern wall, the Zephyrian insects clicked their mandibles together. Each one held bioweapons that pulsed with living energy. Their compound eyes tracked Hyunwoo's movement across the floor. Some whispered in their buzzing language about the strange, soft creature who dared enter their sacred hall without proper arms. The Thraxian warriors stood in perfect formation, their energy blades humming with deadly power. Their leader, General Krax, watched the human with 4 red eyes. His people had ruled 17 star systems through strength alone. Yet this weak-looking being walked among them as if he belonged. Queen Regent Sujin Park sat in the human section of the Great Hall. Unlike every other area, no weapon racks lined the walls behind her seat. No ceremonial arms decorated the space. The human delegation area looked almost empty compared to the martial displays of other species. Hyunwoo took his place beside the Queen Regent. She was a small woman with kind eyes, but those who knew her understood the steel beneath her gentle manner. She had led Earth's government for 10 years, and in that time no human world had fallen to enemy attack. The reports are getting worse, she said quietly to Hyunwoo. 3 more systems lost this week. The ambassador nodded. Across the galaxy, something terrible was moving through space. The creatures called themselves the Void Devourers, and they consumed everything in their path. Entire civilizations vanished when they passed. No one who met them survived to tell how they fought or what they wanted. Chancellor Dong Hyuk Lee entered through a side door. He was older than the others, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. As Earth's military advisor, he had seen more battles than most. He moved like a soldier, even though he too carried no weapons into the assembly hall. Any new intelligence? Queen Regent Sujin asked him. Nothing good, Dong Hyuk replied. The Caraxian patrol fleet found evidence of their latest attack. The planet Xerion had 50 million inhabitants yesterday. Today there's nothing but empty space. Around them, other delegates were arriving. The crystalline Etherians floated above their seats, their bodies made of living light. Even they carried weapons, staffs that could reshape reality itself. The fur-covered Bruthan clan stamped into the hall, battle axes gleaming on their shoulders. Every species, every delegation, every single representative in the Great Hall carried some form of weapon. All except the humans. The ceremony began with the deep sound of horns carved from the bones of space whales. High Chancellor Vextar, a tall being with purple skin and golden eyes, stepped onto the central platform. His voice echoed through the hall without need for amplification. "Representatives of the galaxy," he announced, "we gather in crisis. The threat we face grows stronger with each passing day. The Void Devourers have consumed 47 systems in the past month. Our combined fleets cannot slow their advance." Murmurs rose from every section. The Vorthak growled louder. The Zephyrians' clicking became angry and sharp. Even the peaceful Etherians pulsed with worried light. "We must act," High Chancellor Vextar continued. "But first we must understand what we face." A holographic display appeared above the platform. It showed the edge of known space where systems had simply vanished. The darkness seemed to move, reaching toward the heart of civilization. General Krax of the Thraxians stood up. "We know what we face," he said, his voice like grinding metal. "Enemies. The solution is simple. We build a bigger fleet and destroy them." War Chief Brutus of the Vorthak slammed his spear against the floor. "The Thraxian speaks wisdom. When predators come, you hunt them down." Queen Regent Sujin remained seated, but her voice carried clearly across the hall. "And what happens if they're stronger than our biggest fleet?" "Impossible," General Krax snapped. "No force in the galaxy can match our combined might." "The 47 dead systems might disagree," Hyunwoo said quietly. His words somehow reached every ear in the Great Hall. Silence fell. In that quiet moment, every eye turned to the human section. Here sat the representatives of a species so dangerous that they alone were forbidden from carrying weapons in the Royal Assembly. Yet they looked so ordinary, so fragile compared to the mighty warriors around them. The rule had been made 50 years ago, after the Great Pacification War. Before that conflict, humans had been unknown to most of the galaxy. They controlled only a few small worlds on the outer rim. No one considered them important. That changed quickly. The war had started when the Caraxian Empire decided to expand their territory. They chose human worlds as easy targets. The invasion force was massive, 1,000 ships carrying weapons that could crack planets. What happened next became legend throughout the galaxy. The humans didn't fight the way anyone expected. They didn't meet force with force or try to match the Caraxians' superior numbers. Instead, they did something that confused and terrified their enemies. They got creative. Human tactics made no sense to species that had fought the same way for millions of years. Where other races would charge forward, humans would retreat and circle back. Where enemies expected direct assault, humans would use misdirection and psychology. The war ended not with a great battle, but with a challenge. One human general faced the entire Caraxian War Council in single combat. 7 alien champions, each armed with their finest weapons, against one unarmed human. The human won. After that day, a new law was written into the Royal Assembly's charter. Humans would be the only species allowed to attend without weapons, not because they were peaceful, but because they had proven that they themselves were the most dangerous weapons in the galaxy. Now, facing the Void Devourers, that old law might be the galaxy's only hope. "We need a different approach," Queen Regent Sujin said to the assembled delegates. "Traditional warfare has failed. Perhaps it's time to try something new." The hall erupted in angry voices. Species that had never agreed on anything suddenly united in their outrage at the human suggestion. But in the chaos of shouts and threats, Hyunwoo smiled quietly. He had seen this reaction before. It was the first sign that they were listening.